Hello everyone, Andrew here, and today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite characters, Donkey Kong. There, make that noise. So it's funny, this thing's actually pretty old. I'm surprised it actually still works pretty well. You know, the batteries usually die out by now, but anyway, yeah, Donkey Kong is absolutely awesome, and he has been in a number of really cool games, and this week Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D comes out. So I thought that this would be a good chance to kind of go over some things in my collection that have to do with Donkey Kong, like special edition box sets and box games and just a whole bunch of really cool things, such as these toys. And of course this is the kind of the remote control Donkey Kong car right there. But yeah, overall Donkey Kong is super cool. Unfortunately, you know, I haven't been playing Donkey Kong ever since it was out in the arcade way back then, because I've never really had any good arcades in my area, and definitely not ones that would have any games as cool as that. But I did kind of first experience Donkey Kong on the NES, so I'm just going to kind of start from there and work my way up to where we are today and just talk about some of my favorite memories of Donkey Kong, and also show some of the things that relate to Donkey Kong in my collection. And the first thing that we are going to start with is this right here, and this is Donkey Kong Classics. I guess at one point someone was trying to charge $59.95 for it. Donkey Kong Classics is the very first Donkey Kong game that I ever played. I actually went over to a friend's house and played this, and I played Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. on this, because that's what this is. This has kind of the original two Donkey Kong arcade games on it, and all bundled into an NES cartridge. So I played those two games, and I thought they were pretty neat. My initial impression of Donkey Kong was that it seemed more like a Mario game than anything, because of course, I mean, you play as, originally known as Jumpman back then, but you pretty much play, I mean, he's right on the front there, Mario in the original Donkey Kong game. So I never really thought too much about, like, the actual character Donkey Kong at the time. There was also, of course, Donkey Kong Jr., though, where you do play as Donkey Kong Jr. I thought that game was pretty interesting, too. But overall, I never really thought too much of it. I mean, I just enjoyed this game. I thought it was pretty fun, although I never really thought about Donkey Kong himself as a character too much until a little bit later on. But before we move on to that, just kind of wanted to show that, yes, these are the two games that are included in Donkey Kong Classics, of course. The original Donkey Kong, which was originally $39.98, at a place called Eaton. I don't even think that store exists anymore. I think they sold like overpriced furniture or something and went broke. And then here we have Donkey Kong Jr., which was $49.95 at some point. But anyway, the prices aren't what's important. The point is that these games are really cool and that they are both featured on Donkey Kong Classics. But yeah, back then, I never really thought too much about Donkey Kong himself. My main kind of focus was on the Mario character, which of course wasn't technically Mario back then. I mean, it wasn't in the arcade, but I mean, it was by the time that the NES cartridge came out. But anyway, the point was, Donkey Kong, it never really stuck with me too much. And these are two games that I didn't play back then, but I thought were worth pointing at anyway. And that is Donkey Kong 3, which is a really kind of bizarre game. It's nothing like the first two. I mean, you play as some guy, and you have to kind of shoot at Donkey Kong. It's really weird. And Donkey Kong Jr. Math, which I think was the only NES game ever released in the educational series. This is a really weird game. This kind of teaches you really basic math, and I mean, since I know my basic math, I haven't really delved into it too much, but just trust me, it's a really bizarre game. So yeah, those were kind of Donkey Kong Classics, and also kind of the other NES games too. Were kind of like my first real time playing a Donkey Kong game. I also have here just to show for fun. I mean, of course, the NES was not the first home console that Donkey Kong appeared on. Like right here is a box version of the Intellivision game. I mean, Donkey Kong was so popular, it was even bundled with the ColecoVision, which is what some people consider kind of the best version of it prior to the NES. So, yeah, the NES days were definitely not the kind of debut of Donkey Kong. But the NES was the first console I ever got, and it was the console that a lot of people I knew mainly had, so that was kind of why that was the first place that I ever played it. But the point is, it wasn't until quite a few years later that Donkey Kong would show up again, and this is when I really started to kind of get into the Donkey Kong series, and, you know, just see Donkey Kong kind of go from, like, that character that was kind of in that arcade game to that really cool character, and that is, of course, in the Donkey Kong Country series, which is still, to this day, one of my #1 favorite series of all time. And when I think of the Super Nintendo, it's definitely one of the very first kind of games and series that comes to mind. The Donkey Kong Country series, just revolutionary in so many ways. Of course, the graphics, first of all. I mean, you don't want to say, like, games are all about the graphics, but the first thing that you see when, I mean, you look at the box, you look at the back, or just how impressive the graphics were compared to most other Super Nintendo games out there at the time. But it wasn't just the graphics, it was the music that was awesome, the level design was awesome, just the overall game was so much fun, and this was one of the main reasons like I wanted the Super Nintendo so bad. It was pretty much Donkey Kong Country and Mario World were the two main things that I really wanted when I was looking to get a Super Nintendo. And I have just played this game to absolute death. There's so many things to explore, the bonus games to find. So overall, even to this day, I still really love the Donkey Kong Country series. And of course, no good game, well, hopefully, usually every good game gets at least one sequel. And then you have Donkey Kong Country 2 here. And Donkey Kong Country 2, in my opinion, was even better than the first one. I know everyone's going to have their different opinions, so I'm not saying it definitely is better than the first one, but I just loved kind of what Donkey Kong Country 2 added to it. Some like the new techniques that you could do, the bonus games, collecting the bonus coins, and the DK coins, just all of that, I really, really, really loved. And I know that some people kind of throw around the word collectathon these days, like, any game where you have to collect things is bad. But the Donkey Kong Country series did that really well, where if you wanted to, you could just play through each of the levels beginning to end, and never even worry about kind of the bonus coins and DK coins that were hidden within it. But if you did like collecting things, you could find all the bonus games, find all the DK coins, and that would eventually help you unlock new levels and eventually get you the true ending. And I love games that do that, so of course the Donkey Kong Country series was kind of like one of the best games at the time for that, so I loved Donkey Kong Country 2. And then of course came Donkey Kong Country 3, which was also absolutely incredible. I always debate with myself, I never really know which one I like more. They both have... of course, they're both amazing in my book, but they just both have, things I kind of toss back and forth. Well, that was really cool in number 2, and that was really cool in number 3, but then number 2 also had that. So I can never really decide. Either way, 2 and 3 are just kind of two of my favorite games ever. And if I was stranded on an island with a Super Nintendo and I had to choose a game or two to go with me, I would definitely choose one of the Donkey Kong Country games and maybe a Mega Man X game or something like that. Or maybe I would choose both of these, I don't know. So hopefully that situation never arises where I have to choose what game to take with me to a deserted island. Hopefully no one's ever in that situation. I hate when people kind of pose that question on you. But anyway, Donkey Kong Country series was absolutely amazing. And then Nintendo 64 came out and everyone wondered what was going to happen then. But before we actually get to the Nintendo 64, that reminds me, I actually want to show this. And of course, the Donkey Kong Country was so kind of awesome that it had its own Super Nintendo bundle, which was awesome. Unfortunately, unlike the Nintendo 64 bundle, which we will see soon, the kind of console that comes with this is just your typical grade console. There was nothing really special about it. The coolest part about this is actually the box. I definitely love kind of having this on the shelf and just looking at it and having it up for display. But yeah, it's just your normal console with your normal controller with a Donkey Kong Country cartridge. But it is still kind of a cool thing to just point out that it actually existed, because Donkey Kong Country was just that awesome. But then, as I was saying, you move on to the Nintendo 64, and you get Donkey Kong 64, and again, I have to admit, this is why it's kind of just so sad to see what Rareware is doing today, because they made all of my favorite games back then. I'm sure many people know I'm currently doing a Let's Play of Banjo-Kazooie, which is another awesome game, but the Donkey Kong Country games, Donkey Kong 64, all games that I really, really, really love. And, I don't know, just, there's a lot of things I could say about Donkey Kong 64. I know that a lot of people, they go back to it today and they don't really like it because there's just so many things that you have to collect. There's the golden bananas, the coins, the normal bananas, a whole bunch of other items out there, getting the new attacks, and a lot of people just don't like that, and this is kind of what people throw out there when they think of collectathon, oh, there was way too many things to collect in Donkey Kong 64, but overall, I just loved it all the way through, and Donkey Kong 64, it really felt almost like a 3D kind of version of a Donkey Kong Country game, even though, there was fewer levels, but they were kind of bigger and you had to explore them. It felt a lot like kind of Banjo-Kazooie. I just absolutely loved Donkey Kong 64, and I was really, really impressed with it, and I just made me want to see what Rare would do with the Donkey Kong series next. And a little bit later, it wasn't a platformer, but we got Diddy Kong Racing for the Nintendo 64, and I actually like Diddy Kong Racing even more than I like Mario Kart 64. I like the whole kind of, says on the front, a wild racing adventure. I really like how it kind of didn't just, it wasn't like Mario 64 where you turn it on, it's you go through menus, you select a character, and then you're doing a cup of 4 races and you get a trophy at the end. I really liked how Diddy Kong Racing kind of dumped you in this massive world, and you had to collect the balloons, and you had to find keys and beat mini games and find a whole bunch of other secrets. And again, I'm sure that some people that might not really appeal to. I mean, if you're not the kind of person like me who just loves collecting all those things and going on an adventure like that. But overall, still, even with all of that, the races were really fun. The fact that you could use a plane, a hovercraft, or a car was really, really cool at the time, and I would definitely pick this over Mario Kart 64 any day. For the single player, as far as multiplayer goes, I'd probably choose Mario Kart 64. Just because of the way that it works. And the battle modes were also a little bit better than what was offered in Diddy Kong Racing. But overall, I mean, if I was going to choose a Mario Kart game to play multiplayer with, it definitely wouldn't be Mario Kart 64 anyway. It would either be probably like a Double Dash or a Mario Kart DS Online. But overall, Diddy Kong Racing was really cool. I really loved what they kind of did with the racing genre there. Unlike Mario Kart 64, where it was just menus and racing, it introduced that whole kind of adventure aspect, and I'd really love to kind of see that come back again someday. There was a remake of Diddy Kong Racing for the Nintendo DS, which I got, and it was really cool, and there's even a few new levels in there, which are really neat too, and it's online, so if you ever see Diddy Kong Racing DS, definitely pick that up, because that is a really cool game. And to finish off talking about Donkey Kong and the Nintendo 64, you of course have to mention the special Donkey Kong 64 edition of the Nintendo 64, which, unlike the Super Nintendo, which just kind of gave you the bland, normal, gray console with it, you get this really cool, clear green console with a special controller and the expansion pack and everything that you need to play Donkey Kong 64 in there. And yeah, that is really cool, and I've always really, really loved this set, so I was really happy when I also got the box for it, and you get a whole bunch of really cool screenshots of Donkey Kong 64 back there too. So that was pretty neat, although unfortunately this would kind of be the end of Donkey Kong and Rare's relationship. I think that they had a part in the Game Boy Advance games, because there actually is that, and I do want to point that out, and I forgot to grab it, so I'll be back in 1 second. Before I make a video, I always kind of look at what I have out and I say, is this everything I want in the video? And I say, oh yeah, that looks about right. And then later on, seems like halfway through the video, I'm like, oh right, I was supposed to grab that. So this is what I was thinking of, and what I was just referring to were the Game Boy Advance remakes of the Super Nintendo versions, which were really cool. And yes, it appears that by looking at the top, you will see the Rare symbol there, that they did have a part in these games. It was a really kind of weird agreement where Rare was not allowed to make any home console kind of games for Nintendo, but they can make portable console games. I don't know, it's really bizarre. And it's strange, because I guess maybe that deal ended or something, because I don't know when the last time there was actually a Rare game for a Nintendo portable console that actually came out. And also, I meant to grab this, Donkey Kong Land for the original Game Boy. This was kind of, it was really weird, and I actually really, really enjoyed the Donkey Kong Land series. There were 2 and 3 as well of this. And each one kind of takes the Super Nintendo version of the game. So Donkey Kong Land 1 would kind of correspond to Donkey Kong Country 1, and they would kind of make it 8-bit, make it black and white, and then shove it into a Game Boy cartridge, and it would be like really compressed, and the levels usually wouldn't be anything like the ones on the console, but it was still a really, really fun game. Donkey Kong Land 1 is a lot different from Donkey Kong Country 1, actually. Unlike Land 2 and 3, which were a lot more like their Super Nintendo counterparts. But it was also a really, really cool series. And they were a really cool set of games, and it actually was interesting. They didn't do too bad of a job translating this really massive kind of Super Nintendo game into this small black and white 8-bit Game Boy game. But overall, Donkey Kong Land series was pretty cool. And the remakes were actually really good too. Like I said, I could never decide which one was my favorite, so I of course had to get them both. Donkey Kong Country 1 also had a Game Boy Color game too, which was also interesting. So one more thing I wanted to point out that I meant to point out back around when I was talking about the Super Nintendo games is how in Japan, the Donkey Kong Country series was known as Super Donkey Kong, which is kind of a really bizarre tidbit. I mean, I don't really know why they changed it when it came to North America, considering, I mean, they didn't have any problem just sticking Super on the front of every other game. I mean, Super Mario World, actually, wait, Super Mario World already had Super at the beginning, but you know what I mean. So I really don't know why they kind of decided to go with Donkey Kong Country in North America and Europe. But anyway, before I say anything else silly, let's move on to the next console. Now, Donkey Kong on the GameCube was actually really bizarre because, I mean, unlike Super Nintendo, you get where you had, I mean, awesome platforming games like Donkey Kong Country, and then Nintendo 64. There weren't as many Donkey Kong games, but I mean, you still had Donkey Kong 64, which is amazing. GameCube was a little bit of a letdown. I mean, I'm going to get to that. I mean, the Donkey Kong games for GameCube weren't bad, but compared to, what we had been building up towards after the Country series and 64, GameCube, what it had to offer was a little strange. And the first thing that I'm going to be talking about for the GameCube is Donkey Konga, of course. That really bizarre game where you used the Donkey Kong bongos. And it was pretty much just like a Nintendo version of a rhythm game like Guitar Hero or Rock Band, where all you had to do was kind of hit the right side of the bongos at the right time, and sometimes it would even require you to clap, which was really funny. And everyone would kind of find their workarounds for that, because, clapping after a while, your hands would really start to hurt. So some people would just kind of like blow into the microphone, or they just slap the side of the bongos, which probably wasn't very good for it all, but that's pretty much what happened in the end. And overall, that was Donkey Kong. There wasn't really too much to the game. It's kind of like the Wii, I guess. It was really novel at first. Everyone thought it was really cool. Although as time kind of went on, it kind of wore itself out, I suppose. But Donkey Konga was not the only game to use the Donkey Kong bongos. Two other games were also released in North America which used them, and I love this kind of bundle set I showed in one of my Picket videos here. And those were Donkey Kong Jungle Beat and Donkey Konga 2. Donkey Konga 2 obviously kind of just like an extension of Donkey Konga with some new songs, although Donkey Kong Jungle Beat was actually really interesting, and it was actually a very fun game. I played through it all the way to the end, and it was a Donkey Kong platformer. And it might actually be like one of the very first Donkey Kong platformers, obviously not including, like Donkey Kong arcade game, if you consider that like a real platformer. That actually wasn't made by Rare, so it was very different from other Donkey Kong platformers that we had seen so far. And you actually used the bongos to play it, or like hitting one side would move you right, hitting one side would move you left. I think hitting both of them at the same time made you jump. I actually haven't played it in quite a while. That's definitely one I'm going to have to go back and play and do a random game of the day of, just because I don't know anyone who has actually played it, and definitely don't know anyone who's beat it then. And it is quite fun. And it's a side-scrolling platformer. It has a lot of differences from the Donkey Kong Country series, but it is still quite fun. It's also important to note that in Japan, I believe there was also a Donkey Konga 3, although that was never released here, because I guess by the time 2 came out, people were kind of getting tired of it. And I also just kind of want to show this thing here. This is just an extra set of bongos, and it points out that you can use them with Donkey Konga 2 or Donkey Kong Jungle Beat on the front there. But yeah, that's pretty much the extent of Donkey Kong's appearance on the GameCube. So you had 2 rhythm games and a weird platformer that used the bongos. Definitely very strange compared to the previous generations where, you had 64 and all those other kind of really cool things. And that kind of brings us to where we are today. I know that we have the Wii U now, but the Wii is kind of where Donkey Kong has appeared most recently, and you have Donkey Kong Country Returns on there, which is absolutely awesome. And you also had kind of a Donkey Kong Barrel Blast, which was a new racing game for it that I actually don't really know very much about, and I don't know anyone who has actually played it. Very bizarre, but I never really heard too much about it, so I don't really know what to think about it. And like I said, I've never actually played it myself, but I don't think it was really as good as Diddy Kong Racing. Someone who's played it, leave a comment about exactly what you think of it. And then, yeah, that pretty much brings us to where we are right now, where Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D comes out this week. Now, it's only been about 3 years since Donkey Kong Country Returns came out for the Wii, so if you played it on the Wii, there's probably not a massive reason to get it on the 3DS, unless, you really, really, really liked it. It was a really, really, really good game. It definitely stands up there with, my other favorite Donkey Kong Country games, although they added 8 new levels into it and some things to make it easier in case you found the original too difficult. So, it's not bad. So, if you're interested in playing it again, or if you've never played it before, it's definitely a good thing to go out and grab, especially if you've never played it before and you like the Super Nintendo games. This is a great opportunity to go out and play it. But otherwise, the 8 new levels, they're probably pretty cool. But again, it only came out 3 years ago, so it's kind of interesting. I wonder what exactly made them say, we should port Donkey Kong Country Returns to the 3DS. I remember when I first heard it announced, I was really hoping it would be a completely new game, but hopefully they're using this to kind of gauge interest on if people are still interested in Donkey Kong Country, and they will maybe release a new Donkey Kong Country Return games in Donkey Kong Country Return game in the future. Because that would be really cool. Maybe something for the Wii U or something like that. But yeah, that is pretty much my look at a whole bunch of Donkey Kong games and other related things like console boxes and stuff that I have. So I hope that you enjoyed that, and I love this thing. This thing is so cool, and I'm still really ecstatic that it still works, because I got this many, many years ago. But yeah, overall, I mean, I'm sure that everyone out there probably has their own experiences with Donkey Kong games, so definitely post them, like maybe what your favorite Donkey Kong game is, or maybe what you think about Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D coming out, even though it only came out 3 years ago on the Wii, or maybe what you hope to see next from the Donkey Kong series. Just post all that stuff in the comments below, post what you think about some of the things that I showed, and I really hope that you enjoyed this video of me just showing some of my favorite Donkey Kong things that I have in my collection. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you next time for something different. So thanks, and see you then. Work, darn you! There. See you later.